I've always romanticized the idea of world peace. You know, humankind overcoming their violent tendencies and unifying for the betterment of everyone. From the comfort of my home, it's easy to imagine. But the truth is, there are still wars raging around the world today. And it's easy for someone like me, who's always had it good and safe, to just hold up a peace sign and keep the realities of war at arm's length. Which is why today, I'm talking to somebody who has experienced combat firsthand. My guest today is Jonathan Tuttell, who is a stand-up comedian, that's how I know him, but he also has a rich background of serving in the military, including as a Green Beret. I haven't really known many people who have served in the Army, much less faced combat, so it was really interesting for me to get to talk to John, and he was really open and vulnerable about his experiences, which made this conversation really valuable. I think it's one of the best interviews we've had on this channel yet. And on that note, I think we're going to jump into this conversation about the realities of war with John Tuttell. Enjoy.
You're alive.
John, thank you so much for coming out.
And joining me here today.
Thank you very much, Zach. That is my pleasure.
One of the things that I've loved about being in the comedy community so far is that it introduces me to all sorts of people that I never would have met otherwise. And you are definitely one of them. I have really enjoyed getting to know you, but I feel like our paths in life are very different. You know, like you have a military background, you're a Green Beret.
Right, am I saying that right?
Yeah, good luck.
So ignorant about everything in this field of the world. My parents were hippies. They were like conscientious objector types. Like my mom was very firm about I'll support you in whatever stupid comedy magic stuff you want to do. Just don't get yourself killed. It was basically what my mom told me growing up.
Yeah.
So I haven't really met a lot of people who have been in the service or who have lived that life. So it's something I'm interested to learn more about and kind of broaden my own perspective on kind of somebody who's actually lived through that. So to get started here, I'm just interested to kind of hear, I guess, what your first off childhood was like. Where did you grow up? What were your parents like? And kind of paint me a little bit of a picture of your childhood.
Okay. It seems a pretty good place to start. I did start in childhood mostly. It was down in Florida, actually. I'm a Florida man, which is unfortunate. But I grew up in mostly in Miami, down there. I was the oldest of three. My little brothers are both disabled. My middle brother, Robert, he's 4 years younger. He was born 3.5, 4 months premature. It's insane. He was the size of, he was basically non-viable, but he just very stubborn. You know, he held on in the NICU under a lot of machines for a long time. But his retina's detached and he was developmentally disabled in some pretty significant ways. But he is also, it's kind of magical. I was gone for many years in the Army, didn't really see my family. Now he's over 30 and he's probably the most normal of the three of us. To be honest, he's the most reasonable by a mile. And he has a personality that's really evident and it's there. Whereas honestly, as a young kid, it was almost an echo box. It was, his world must have been crazy. Being blind from birth, it's probably got a lot of, it changes the way that you start to build your mental image of the world, right? You don't have a visual. So, for example, I've tried to do this on stage a little bit where I talk about how, most kids, if you'll try to do something sneaky, but he doesn't understand the concept of hiding. You know what I mean? So he'll just do some shit he's grabbing his balls as a kid. He's like, hey, Robert, knock that off. And walk 4 feet away and try to do this shit again. The poor bastard must think we could read his mind, initially that's the only thing he knew. So I think I got a little extra empathy training early to see that man, some people's shit is just not like mine at all. Some people have challenges that really are fundamental to their existence that I don't even understand. And that was pretty lucky, actually. A couple years later, my youngest brother, Jared, was born. He's also, he's like me, but just, I think his ADHD is beyond anything. He's just had a really hard time in life. But he's up here now with both my parents. They're still alive. I got them from Florida out here to Washington because I wasn't moving back. And I was fortunate enough to get them out here a few years ago, so I get to see them every now and then. Yeah, it was cool. I was very fortunate because, they're still around. And I didn't, about 15 years, I didn't see my family for more than 3-4 weeks total. So I really worried, like, as I was getting out, I was like, man, as adults, we never knew each other. Like, I know my parents and the role that they played as parents, where we were sort of opposed, and like, as a grown-up, I was like, shit, they're going to be gone. I took some mushrooms, and like, I think after Afghanistan, and that was one of the revelations of that trip specifically, was like, my parents are just adult human beings like me, and like, I don't know them in that capacity. I don't have a relationship with them. And I was like, why don't I? I don't know. I just opened up to them totally, like all the things that you've never told your parents. I tell them everything now. Like, they don't approve of everything I do, but I mean, I get zero interest in hiding, or I don't know. I kind of do that with everybody, sometimes to my detriment.
What did your parents do for a living?
My dad's very much, I guess, like me. He went to the Navy for a few years in Vietnam, mostly just to get a Navy job before he got like sucked into the grunts and stuff during the draft. My mom was there as well. That's where they met. My dad got the GI Bill. I think he initially got a biochemistry degree, worked in a hospital for a minute and didn't like it, and then finished with film school at Florida State University. Got his master's in film, and then worked in the film industry for like 25, 30 years as assistant director and second assistant director and stuff. It was kind of cool. Like, we both share a love of cinema quite a bit and stuff. So that's one thing that we sort of bonded on, like, as I started in the teen years.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
So how old were you when you enlisted to go?
I was 20. I did not expect myself to be joining either. At 18, I would have denied it being possible, probably.
What led you to that decision?
Well, I think probably the primary catalyst was breaking up with my girlfriend. I was too emotionally undeveloped to be able to handle that alongside it's not patriotism, but I mean, after 9/11, it was a very interesting the zeitgeist was different. I mean, and it was a beautiful thing to see in a way. For like 2 weeks, we were united under one flag, the United States of America. There were no divisions for about 2 weeks. And then slowly they worked their ways back in, as they do. But for a little while, it was nice that people sort of saw a unity of purpose. I just felt like some sort of a civic responsibility, I feel. And alongside that, I think, was just the idea that there was going to be some experiences that were beyond anything that I'd ever experienced or imagined, that were going to be happening to people. And for some reason, I felt like I ought to be there to bear witness. And I think initially I had thoughts that I could maybe bring my morality and like I have a good moral code. I feel like it's important for people to go to war who who oppose war and think a war is super wrong. And there's actually many soldiers that are like that. But once it's time to fight, then that's where I want to be. There's no one reason we ever do anything, right? I think those are the main reasons.
So I take it because your dad was also, you said, Navy, so he probably was pretty supportive of that decision, but I imagine also probably scared, like, to see his kid go off, because I've known a few people who were in some part of the Army, but a lot of the time it's not combat, it's like medical or like IT, like I've known people who are in those sorts of fields. So like it's got to be scary, I imagine, for your family when you made that choice. Did you decide to go straight into combat? Did you know when you signed up that that's where you wanted to be?
Pretty much. And funny enough, my dad was not terribly supportive. They were not unsupportive. They didn't disown me. But funny enough, I mean, they're both hippies too, and then they're particularly afraid of losing their child, which I suppose is normal. I felt really bad because, I mean, it actually really stressed them worse than I had initially considered. Because I'm a selfish asshole in a way that's not, I don't say that super deprecatingly. I mean, the world just needs all kinds of people, but it's just, I'm like my little dog Retro. I see a goal, I just go off after it, and it's almost, I don't know, there's very little even as a kid, like I was always fighting authority. So the idea of just making my own decisions without considering anyone else was like radical. And it was a thing I was thirsting for. And I think now I've become too accustomed to it, and I don't really bend as often as I probably should for people, trying to work on that.
So what year was that you first?
That was 2003 when in March we invaded Iraq. I was protesting with my friends for the invasion, and then after the invasion had happened, it was like, well, I made my voice heard, and now it's time to go do that. And, a lot of people don't see how I could be in both places, but I Actually, I think that's kind of my attitude toward violence in general. I think that it's abhorrent. I think that I know that it's wrong. There's like a feeling deep in your soul when you see horrible violence, like it's wrong. If there is a universal moral imperative, it's just universally wrong in a really fundamental way. But the sucks is that if everyone were to, give up on violence, well, then if anyone with a monopoly on violence would utilize it to pretty bad advantage. So there has to come a time to fight. And once that time comes, I mean, I think that my attitude is always find ways to avoid, de-escalate, everything I can do. But then once there is no turning back and we're clearly past some Rubicon where violence is now indicated and necessary, there's only one way to apply it, and it's with absolute, overwhelming, brutal intensity. It's not something you can learn, I don't think. Some people, maybe it comes natural to them, but there's a huge social, mental, psychological barrier that we have to unleashing real aggression and anger on somebody. Thank God. For our species, it might be the only thing that's kept us here this long. But I don't know. I mean, I never would have learned that, like, that's something you need to have inside of you in a survival situation necessarily. And it's something I probably wouldn't have learned elsewhere. Like you said, most of the people you meet, like 99%, it's insane. It's like almost 99% of the military don't do anything regarding getting shot at. Sadly, that number actually picked up quite a bit more because there was no real front line to, the Iraq and Afghanistan conflict. You had supply convoys being ambushed and attacked. So people that were normally in the rear of the fighting were now getting exposed to it occasionally. So I think that you had a little bit greater participation in some of the fear. But yeah.
So you said you were 20 when you enlisted?
I was 20. I turned 21 like right after I got to Korea, my first duty station.
So you were out of high school. Did you go to any college? Did you work some jobs? Like what would you do in those kind of in-between years before you made that leap?
Well, I've worked pretty much since I was 14. I got a job because my parents didn't have much in the way of money, and with a disabled little kid, Robert had a lot of medications that were I got to see what the pharmaceutical industry is doing to people that are chronically ill and how they're just milking you. It really becomes, I guess this is also why I don't have kids. It is so impossible to afford a disabled child. So I just always didn't want to rely on my parents from like the beginning. I started getting jobs. I started lawnscaping, I guess. Landscaping, there we go. That's the word I'm looking for. Landscaping with my buddy under the table. He basically had a bunch of illegal immigrants and me running his shady ass business. But I don't know. I always had jobs. I moved up to the Taco Bell, which was great. It was indoor work. Slanging burritos was actually kind of fun, except that you smell like, have you ever worked fast food? That smell, oh man, that fry oil just kind of stays in your clothes. And back then, dude, Taco Bell, you used to have a bright blue, red, and yellow, like crazy, stupid ass clown outfit. Nowadays, it's this black outfit that is really subdued. But it used to be you were wearing a sign saying, I work in fast food. I would get heckled on my way back home from work and shit. But it was still a step up because I didn't get rained on. I wasn't working outside and breaking my back. And then I moved to Radio Shack, sold phones, air conditioning all the time, just moving up all the time in the world. Did some telemarketing when I first got to college, and that was September 11th, 2001, was my first day as a telemarketer. So it was weird, and I have used that in comedy. But yeah, I was so broke, I showed up to Florida State, which, to answer your other question, yeah, I did go to college, sorry. I went to Florida State and signed up there for a physics degree, but then found out that, you really need to like do work to like get a degree. It turns out I wasn't sailing through that place. Well, I did well when I went to class. I just I wasn't able to be accountable. That wasn't something I could do, showing up. So I worked at the Olive Garden instead, shortly after I got out of that thing. And that was honestly fun. I feel like if the Army hadn't come along, I probably would have spent 5 or 6 years just waiting tables is enjoyable to me. I mean, drinking cheap beer and waiting tables would probably have sucked up my 20s, possibly, if I hadn't joined the military.
So when you finally did enlist, how did you like physically do it? Did you go to a booth somewhere? Did you sign up online? How did you?
It was at the mall. Yeah. Yeah, I went to the mall. I knew that there was a recruiter around. I'd never much paid attention, but I kind of rather impulsively. I mean, I suppose it'd been brewing with we were all talking about going to war nationally. So it was a conversation that was being had, and it was not unheard of, but it was kind of far in my mind. And then suddenly just seemed like the right time, and I pulled the trigger. They were, I think I wanted to be in the Marines, which is fuck. Thank God I didn't. I mean, the Marine Corps is great, and I would have rather been in the Marines than some other places, but it's also like, dude, ask any Marine. They brainwash the shit out of it. Their indoctrination program is just kind of beautiful. Like, in a way, like, they have a very different, much more fascist, which I would love to talk about later, for sure. But I showed up, and there was no Marines there. They were just gone for the day. And the Army guys are just circling like buzzards. They're like, hey, what's up, kid? You live in the Marines? Oh, they're not here. Come on in. And I was like, cool, Army, whatever. Just like, put me in military. I want to go war. Like, that's what I'm here to do. I hadn't looked any of it up. I think normal people do research. They think about it. They look into it. And I just more or less was like, hey, I want to jump out of planes and go, to the combat. Like, that was about it. So I was easy meat. Took their tests, and I did well on academic style stuff. So they were very excited. I think they get some kind of bonus. And it wasn't too long. It's some weird feeder system. You get, once you do your paperwork and finally pass a urinalysis clean of any cannabis, I failed my first one, which was unofficial. Then you go, they send you out to Jacksonville, what they call it MEPS, the Military Entrance Processing Center System. Pardon me, but something like that. It is MEPS, and that's where you have a bunch of weirdos in like tidy whities and I didn't even shave your head yet, but you're like doing duck walks and stuff while doctors are, getting your physicals, you're getting, they're doing background checks and all this other stuff, and they put you up in a little Ramada Inn with all the other jabronis that are trying to join for maybe a night. And I think then you show up to them again and head out directly from there to basic training. They give you and I'll have to, geez, it's been so long, I'll have to look into this to be sure. And it might have changed, but they give you a airplane ticket and a time to be there. And then once you get to, I was at Fort Sill, Oklahoma initially for my training. And then you get on a bus, and from that point, it's basically like everything you see in the movies. You're now under the control of the U.S. government. They have your ass and they own it. So 24/7, you will be running around doing whatever the fuck they say while they yell at you. And yeah, it was pretty much like what you'd see in television. Fort Sill, Oklahoma sucks. Don't go to Lawton, Oklahoma. I'm sorry, the people of Lawton, but it sucks. You're not even really going to argue. It was cool, man. I feel like basic training was really exciting in the sense that you look at it from the outside, like, hey, we're going to take these young men who are savages. 18-year-old men are just not developed really in the frontal lobes yet. We're just the most genetically expendable portion of the population, which is why we are the ones that go to war generally. That's kind of the way it's always been. And you somehow need to create a product at the end of this system that can do these things. You need to be able to read a map, and it's a long road to get there because you don't know where everyone's starting from. Some people come from a home, but it's where they got, a natural education in our culture. You got some people who didn't have a home at all, basically, and never got given the basic human instructions. So it was cool to see week 1 starts with basic human instructions. Here's how you make your bed. Here's how you shave your face. Here's how you wash your ass. Like, literally, if you had just come to this planet yesterday, like, this was the course for you. It was kind of beautiful to see. Like, I mean, like, and this is why I dream of mandatory federal service happening, and that's one of the big reasons, too. The idea that everyone at 18 will get those instructions. We know if you went past the age of 18 here that you know how to shave your face, show up somewhere on time. Just these basic things, let alone fuck the warfare part of it, Just, anyway, you get your head shaved and you get treated like a monkey for like 14 weeks. It was pretty lame. All right.
So that's training. So that that
It's training, then you're trained. Where do you go?
once they're all trained up.
So yeah, initially you go to basic training. They call it OSIT. So you get your basic boot camp, as they would call it. They call it boot camp in the Marines. We call it boot camp colloquially, just because everyone outside of the military calls it boot camp. But basic combat training is like 8 weeks, and then you have I was a forward observer, which means if you've seen like Saving Private Ryan and stuff, and I'm also, for the people that are not familiar, basically I'm with the infantry dudes that you see, but I'm the guy with the radio on my back, because as soon as it comes time to, hey, there's something we need to blow up, I'll call the guns, the howitzers, and do the math and use my binoculars to guide them onto, because they can't see. Those big artillery guns, they're somewhere, it's in direct fire is what it's called. So they have to, on a computer, on a map, get the data that I give them to just aim in the air and just shoot this shit. And it's remarkable how accurate all this stuff is now that it's computerized. But that's my main job, is to bring in direct fire to support troops. So, bring in the planes, or really helicopters and airplanes, become the number one indirect fire asset I worked with in Afghanistan and Iraq. That's what I did.
It sounds like so casual when you just say it, because you'd like, it is to some degree, like you lived through it and you did it like day to day, but like to me, just the stuff that you're saying is like so incredible to even like just imagine like being in that situation. So to slow it down and zoom in a little bit, could you tell me about, if you remember, maybe like the first time that you went into combat? Do you remember
Oh yeah.
that specifically?
Oh, very much. Well, I didn't sleep at all. I was scared shitless. I mean, when we got deployed, I mean, first, the way that it went down in my case, just, let's put everyone in my shoes as if you were there. You're in Korea, you know just a little bit about the Army, enough to get by, but you're still clueless when you're sent to your first unit. It's expected that once you get there, your leadership will take you under the wing and beat you up and like teach you all the stuff you need to know and train you further to employ you along with them. So that kind of started to happen, but I was there. I was still at a point where I came to the briefing, the plan before the mission. It was a night raid. We were going to walk out. We were in southern Baghdad near Fallujah, and this is 0304. And there was a mission where I did not I was too scared to ask questions. I sat there in a room with like 100 people going over like the little terrain model and where everyone's going to be. And I'm like, okay, I know where I'm going to be. And that's like all I can make sense of. I really just like, I'm just going to follow people. Did not understand the concept of the operation. And looking at it now, it more blows my mind than it did then. At the time, I was used to not knowing what the fuck was going on around me.
So what was the mission in this particular instance? Because, you say you joined post 9/11. Most people don't think of Korea as being the place that you'd end up. So why were you in Korea? What was your mission?
Yeah, this is about the end. I mean, people still do tours of duty in Korea, although it's vastly less. In 2003, we had started the Afghanistan war was underway, but we hadn't stepped into Iraq yet. And politicians understood that it was suicide to draft. You couldn't do a draft. Nobody's getting reelected. They would never really consider it. But they did start to understand shortly for Iraq that, oh shit, we came in way too underprepared. We need way more people. Just like the first general, they fired General Shinseki, by the way. I won't go into the whole history of it that I know well, but, when Wolfowitz and all those assholes under George W. Bush were like, hey, we're going into Iraq, weapons of mass destruction, make us an excuse, and like just push for it. And their chief of staff, the highest army general they have, in a deposition, they're like, okay, what do you think the plan is? Like, what would be the problems if we came into Iraq? And he was like, well, if you don't triple the numbers you're talking about sending, if you don't send in at least like 150, whatever the number was, you're going to end up having a quick war that we're going to win, but then a protracted insurgency that's going to last forever because you weren't able to secure all the munitions depots and all this other shit. You're going to leave your back unguarded, and all the people that aren't happy to have you there are going to raid those munitions depots. They're going to turn those into IEDs, and you're going to just be walking around blowing up for years. Well, they didn't like that answer. They were like, yeah, we don't like that answer. You're fired. Get us a general who would tell us that our idea is great. And that's what they did. So, I mean, shortly after the war in 2003, as they came in, they were like, fuck, this is a little tricky. It had been already 6 months into the war, I think, when I reported to Korea. And it wasn't long there before they're like, hey guys, guess what? They're deploying us from Korea to Iraq for a year. Like, it was unheard of. They never deployed anyone from another deployment location. So some guys had been in Korea for a year without seeing their family, and now they're doing another year straight in Iraq. It was a weird time. But once I got there, like, I took like a few days before my first mission. So it was mostly just figuring out, like, getting to the desert. We flew into Kuwait, and it was just this really blank desert there that we set up big cardboard and plywood tents and huts that we would practice with our weapons in and stuff and get issued all the gear. I wish, I'm sure that we've got some of this stuff captured. I really wouldn't mind. I would love to show people the experience of being in the early stages of the war, because it was vastly different looking by the end. We had no idea what the fuck we were doing. People had trained to theoretically deploy a military for, however long, but they'd never really done it. And as soon as they did start doing it, it was an interesting place. And it's the only reason that I survived a military career, by the way, too. I mean, not so much my very first mission, but eventually I got good at what I was doing. And it just became evident that the old power structures that existed, that were reinforced through the military regulation and just culture, really shifted quickly, because now a lot of people who are accustomed to being the authority and the source, so you shut the fuck up and listen to me, suddenly they're bent down behind the Humvee like, who knows what to do? Like, how do we get out of here? Like, all the bullshit is gone. It's magical in a way that, like, I wish everyone could know. To live in a world with zero pretense, no bullshit, it's kind of like intoxicating, man. It's just, and so I did survive where I would never have survived, because I don't like authority. I'm very much a soldier that would have had my ass whipped all the time and been in trouble all the time. But when it came time to, oh shit, now we're a combat army and we don't know what to do half the time. Everyone that you have that's reliable, suddenly you're getting promoted, let alone not kicked out. So that was just a very strange crease in time. And I don't think it ever would have existed. I think 5-10 years in either direction, and I would have had a dishonorable discharge of some type, and I wouldn't have been in very long. That's kind of weird to think. But my first mission, I just stared up at the ceiling all night in my bunk, waiting until 2 a.m. because we were going to go raid like a whole block. We were going to take a block of this neighborhood where there was a supposed bomb maker. And we were going to like knock the door and then go search the house, try to find and arrest him. And that was just the mission. I was going to be up at a support by fire position, which I didn't quite even understand what that meant. Maybe we'll get into it. And it was just super scary. I don't know. I went over the plan, didn't understand it, checked my gear 10 times and all my stuff. And then I just laid there in my bunk, like a cot, staring at the ceiling like I really should get some sleep, but it's like 2 hours until we got to go. And I just stared at the wall for like 2 hours, thinking that this could be my last night on Earth. And like, it's boring as fuck. Like, it sucks. But it was boring. It ended up being completely uneventful, and so were several missions until it stopped being uneventful. And by that point, fortunately, I'd had my feet under me a little bit, because, yeah. Okay, I'm sorry. Did I address?
Yeah, no, it's really interesting to hear you talk all about it. Yeah, you absolutely are doing a great job answering the questions. So I recently went to your 40th birthday party, and it was really, I thought, interesting, because it was like a celebration of your life, and it was this big milestone, and it was this big party, and everyone was having a great time. But then there was also like the kind of profound like undercurrent, because you had like all these items on display from your time, and like you were telling stories, and it just kind of added like this depth to the whole experience that I really appreciated.
Thank you.
One of the stories that you told was like the first time that you were shot.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if you wanted to talk a little bit about that, or other, I guess, notable, like peak level, like fearful, like, I don't know, that's kind of the peak
crazy experiences.
Yeah,
right.
That's the kind of stuff that is so impossible to comprehend, and hearing somebody that's actually been through it, I think, is really interesting if you're willing to talk about that stuff.
Oh, I'm absolutely willing. You know what I'm laughing about is it occurred to me once before that how strange it is to, in this instance, being the one actually doing this stuff, right? And yet, I think in Iraq, I guess it was the second tour, there was always times where things were very much cinematic in what was happening. Like, there was a time that I called in some Apache gunships that, as I was running down the street in Baghdad, we were responding to our friends in the Humvees up north that were getting attacked by RPGs and small arms fire. And as I heard all the stuff on the radio, we were in some house talking to someone, and we heard all stuff. We're like, oh, we gotta go. And like, I just happened to get lucky. Some Apaches were coming by, and I was patched into their net because I was working with them regularly. And really quickly, they just almost turned in air and were like almost right over us. And as we were running up on the scene up ahead where the fight was happening, they started their 30mm like machine gun, like just laying waste to those dudes as like the shells were falling like everywhere around me as I was walking. And I was running toward the explosions that were like from the rounds hitting. And I sat there running through the explosions and the shit. And I was like, this is like a fucking movie. How stupid is that thought? Like, movies try to be this. Like, but I'm like, this is like a movie. How cool. Like, Jesus, dude, like, we can't ever be someplace in the real life. It's so fucking strange. But yeah, there was those moments, and you do recognize those moments. You're like, holy shit, this is like some stuff you would have seen in a movie. And I did enjoy those moments for sure. It's kind of strange looking back at it now. There was a big evolution in the way I joined the Army. I did not expect a career in the military at all. Even after I did my Iraq, I was like, cool, I did my thing. I'm getting out, but the first 12 months we were there, and my contract was up, and I was like, all right, I hate the military, but I did it. It's over. Let's get out. They offered me like crazy money. They were kind of desperate in '05, '04. I was like, stick that money up your ass. They're like, $30,000 to a 20-year-old. You know, this is crazy. And I still didn't even consider. I was like, fuck you. I'm out. I'm done. And then I broke my arm when we got back to Colorado on a motorcycling accident. So I couldn't get out when I was planning to. I had to wait until I healed. They won't let you out until you're, you know, as healthy as you were when you came in or something. So in that time, everyone got stop lost, which was a thing where they were just, hey, you think you're getting out? No, you're not. You go back to Iraq. We don't have enough people. The draft is untenable. So we're just going to do something we've never done and wear people out. I mean, in World War II, you would spend maybe a month, 2, 3 months tops at the front line before they'd rotate your entire unit back. Now, 15 months, constant battle, doesn't matter. And then you go right back a year later for another. It was just, people spent half their lives over in Iraq because we didn't have enough manpower to do the job, and the job shouldn't have been done. But since we were doing it, we weren't willing to actually do what it took to get the manpower, aka a draft or something. So just thinking about, like, I was on my way out, but my friends who I'd become very, very close with and very loyal to, suddenly, like, they're all going to Iraq, and I think I still had the ticket out, but it was like, well, I just knew, like, because we lost a guy on that first tour who was maybe the best human being. Definitely the best warrior I've ever known. Like, just, I met him. He was a executive officer. He was the coolest dude. He was just super likable. He was kind of short, but he had a smile that he was just a winner, man. You would follow him anywhere pretty quickly. And like the first time I met him, we're in Korea in a squalling rain at like 2 a.m. in the mud. And it was freezing too. It was like 40 degrees. And I was pretty miserable. I was the lowest guy on the totem pole. So they're like, hey, you go pick up like the brass casings out of the mud that we just shot our blanks with. And we got to then go wash off that stuff and count them and turn them into some place. Just a horrible, stupid, shitty job to do, right? And he's in charge of it. So I'm trying to be gloomy doing this. And then the poor man, he's just beaming sunshine somehow. He's like, hey, Tuttell, where are you from, man? He's just like doing this shit super fast, and it was impossible, you know, to stay upset. He was kind of magical. He set apparently a bunch of football rushing records and stuff. And I mean, he had a lot of feathers in his hat. He was literally, like, tactically, he was just seemed to be better than me at everything, and it was okay. It was like, it's cool that you're smarter and awesomer than I am. It didn't bother me in the slightest. And somehow he got killed by a suicide bomber. During Ramadi in 2004. So when we got back, it bonded us a lot, you know, trauma bond probably. So as I was looking at getting out, I was like, you know what? I guess I'm really listening for another trip. Like, this is the last one for real, but I would never forgive myself at that point if my guys went and they got hurt and I wasn't there. Because the what if monster probably climbing your bed at night the rest of your life. Like, what if I could have done something? All those, I was afraid of that. So I signed back up, this time for no money. They took the money off the fucking table. I was like, God damn it, dude. But, you know, I was glad because it was a really horrible tour. And I mean, at least now I don't have to worry if I hadn't been there.
So was that like the first like close person you decided that you lost during your service?
Oh yeah. Yeah, Luke Wollenweber. He was the first one. I don't know that he was the first in our unit, but he was the first guy that I knew kind of well and really hit us really hard. And especially, it was particularly unfair because I think, especially if you're younger, there is some sort of an unspoken belief that there's some balance in the universe. But, you know, for the main character to be killed in the first scene, you're like, what? This shit does not make sense. It's supposed to be one of us dumb nobodies. Like, the fact that it was that the best guy among you could just die for no reason really probably at least got me started early on accepting the true random nature of events in warfare, which has probably preserved me from going completely crazy, because you just have to realize, like, man, wrong place, wrong time is 85% of the story for most people in that business. You work your ass off, train your ass off to control that 15% as well as you can. But that 85 TS is always going to be there. I mean, you're really just, anyways. Yeah, that was the first time that I really made it real for me, and it sucked me in. Like, I was trying to get out, and next thing you knew, I've got another contract to go, and we ended up doing 15 months during the surge time frame in southern Baghdad, and that's where I got shot. From that story I told you, I mean, we lost so many people. It was crazy. They actually did a documentary on it. The BBC did a documentary on my unit because we lost so many people. And it was almost like I almost was concerned of mutiny at one point because we were losing a guy a day. It was like Russian roulette. You were being forced to play Russian roulette. Hey, go on patrol. You'll drive around in the Humvees until you explode. Because the bad guys don't wear a uniform. You don't know where they are. They look like everyone else until they start shooting at you. And they're not going to shoot at you until they've already blown you up and they've made you disarrayed, and so that they can shoot real fast and run before you can do anything about it. I mean, the reality of combat versus what everyone expects, some Call of Duty movie, action movie where they're shooting. The reality of combat was more like get blown up. If you survive, crawl out of the rubble, get shot at, not know where it's coming from, just terrifying, and then they're gone. You don't get to do anything. You're impotent. It is, it's a real exercise in kind of, oh boy, let's do this again tomorrow. It just really, you have to either, I got very good at accepting my own death, but people were not, well, to a point where like, I'm not getting in that truck, like I'm not going. And we're like, dude, are we going to have to like start arresting people for, it was a weird time. Unfortunately, we did make, the way that I found to do things back then, and I do believe in this, is, so we had guys under me like, hey man, I'm not getting in the truck, I can't do it. From my position as their sergeant 85, it's like, hey, shut the fuck up, put your gear on, you're a professional and you're a soldier, you get in that goddamn thing and blah, blah, blah. Just chew their ass. And then I turn around when they're doing their thing and I go into my boss's office and close the door and I tell them, you're not fucking letting my guys go out. What the fuck? And then, you know, you punch, you cover it down, you punch up. That's like the way you lead. And then people see that and they, or better yet, they don't see it because they need to respect the chain. But I mean, they will just know that you've got their back as a leader, and that's important. And finally they did, they bought it, and they were like, okay, you guys don't have to drive around anymore. You're clearly just exploding constantly. So we started going in at night, and I would be on one side with under night vision, and my other, my buddy Pat Hammock normally would take the far side of the street. We'd just go into the neighborhood and at night, sneaky style, and get to the first intersection. We'd reach around. I'd get into the sewer line, pull on oh, there's a wire. I'd pull on a little bit, feel something attached, and be like, okay, get it back. You know, we just sneak back real quick, call in the explosive ordnance, which takes like 2 hours. So you all sit there, wait for a while, the robot comes and blows it up, and that's your mission for the night. You can't even go more than a block in because every four-way intersection had a bomb in it. That's why we stopped driving, because it was like someone's gonna die today. When we rolled out it was psychologically actually kind of amazed we handled it as well as we did, you know, considering that. But
yeah, I mean, it seems like even now when you talk about it, it seems like there's a little bit of like both sides of the coin, where it's like on one hand it was like it seems like obviously it was really hard and like you went through a lot, and on the other hand it's kind of like the camaraderie, and it seems like it really kept you going and like got you through it. It's really interesting to hear you talk about and try to process, I think, both sides of that.
processing is a word that I've been thinking about a lot lately too, because I mean, now when I sit alone, a lot of these stories, like I lived there, I could still be there. Like I am there right now if I want to be. I can make it as clear as day, some of the memories. And I don't think that it's something that I don't feel haunted by them. And I don't even feel necessarily troubled, even though, I mean, like if I'm single and I'm hanging around at my house, like, yeah, there's an 85% chance if there's like 5 hours I've been alone in my house, I've at least had a 5-minute crying spell of some type, right? Like just being somewhere else for a little bit and letting those emotions sort of vent off, because I got this impression afterward, like moments, time doesn't give a fuck how momentous something was that just happened. It just keeps marching on at the exact same rate it did before. But some of those moments are, the depth is so significant that you'll spend years going back to that moment, living that moment. It becomes deeper because it's too much to process in the moment that it exists. And I feel like there's a lot of that with combat. And I knew that it was more than I could handle, so I didn't stress out over the fact that I was like, yeah, it'll just be this well of sadness inside me. And every now and then I'll let a little bit out. Started talking to some of these stories a few years after they happened to close friends, and it helped. I mean, it helped a lot, actually, because I can literally tell a lot of these stories. I definitely probably get a little emotional, but I can generally speak through most of them, which is a big amount of growth from where I was initially, where it would instantly just, it was too painful to touch. But I knew it was there, and it had to be dealt with. And I kept kicking that can down the road, which is kind of where I am now. I mean, I've engaged in some therapy, but I'll need to do more.
I imagine it's got to be a lifelong effort to kind of work through everything that you've been through. If you don't mind, I'm going to keep trudging into sensitive waters.
Please, man. I hope to share things that people haven't heard from anywhere else, because
Yeah. So on the
Flip side of, losing people you care about, another part of being in combat is killing people.
Hmm.
Did you kill people?
I did. It's most of the time, I think that it's a soft line, or at least it was for me, in the sense that you spend a lot of time with you're shooting at muzzle flashes. You are intending to shoot the person that is shooting at you, but it's not even it's not a person that's shooting at you. It's a muzzle flash. It's an enemy. It's the thing that is causing you to be shot at the moment. It just, as strange as it is, this is something that kind of, I don't know how to explain, but I don't feel bad about almost any of it. I think I made a distinction in my mind between being a murderer and being a killer. And I was attempting to be the best killer I could be as a part of my training. But a murderer is someone who kills. A killer is like, hey, when it needs to be done, I'd be good at it. But the idea of murdering someone, it just seemed to be a completely different world. Like, to commit murder, to have premeditation, go and kill somebody, pretty messed up. And in the military, you can kind of almost do stuff like that. I mean, in certain raids, you might shoot some almost unsuspecting people. I mean, that's kind of gross and ugly. I was never really in a position to do that, fortunately. So, I mean, I wonder how I would feel about it if I had. A couple of my friends accidentally killed some civilians because that would have to happen at some point. You spend every day with suicide bombers occasionally rushing at you. There's going to be one family who just, whatever happened that morning, they just rushed at our checkpoint because they forgot, or as crazy as that seems. Because I know for a fact, like, one that you would guarantee that's a suicide bomber. Nope, just a family that were not paying attention or something. And, now one of them's dead. The guy that shot into that one vehicle in the story I'm thinking about, he was very much upset about it. He died later in the war. So, I mean, I guess at least I don't know how he would have dealt with it for long. But I never got put in that position, and that's a very fortunate thing. So I get to sit here, and the position I have on it is almost rather aloof, and it almost bothers me. I feel like it should bother me more. I don't want to sound callous, and I don't think. I mean, I very much care for human beings and love human beings, and it's just very strange. Like, at a certain point, when someone's shooting at me or my friends, there's not even like a thought process anymore. It's just, I don't know. I wonder, maybe after I do some therapy, maybe I'll uncover some really dark self-hatred or something. But I mean, I think in the same vein, I'm kind of proud of some of the stuff I've done, but I'm almost not, in the same sense that I'm not as guilty about some stuff. It's like, I almost view myself as almost a passenger in this ride, like, I am doing the best I can, but I don't know that. I just feel like, I'm not sure what I'm trying to say exactly here. I just guess that I don't feel as responsible for things, good or bad. I feel like we overestimate our control in the world in general. And I think by just acknowledging that, it gives me a buffer for feelings of guilt. And I definitely feel guilty in life about shit I've done that's messed up. So I know I have a guilt mechanism, at least. But I should feel guilty for having killed human beings, I suppose. And every now and then I think about it, like, that I don't know the person I killed, and like, I don't know what their life was. And I definitely, like, philosophically in general, I think it's horrible that whoever I killed, even though we got to that moment where they're shooting at me now, I got to shoot them. Well, there's a lot of moments leading up to that moment. They probably didn't come out of the womb just shooting at people. And that sucks. It sucks that their story ended there. And that is something that bothers me, but not in a specific way that I stay up at night about, which I count as a blessing. I don't know. I mean, I actually sleep pretty well, I think. All this stuff that I'm talking about, like, I don't really have nightmares. It's just, when I think about them, especially when I think about the people I've lost. I mean, I think there's a trauma response to the fear of being shot at and being there. My body physically, for about 4 months after Iraq, especially the second tour, was just highly tense, and I was classic PTSD, there's a guy named Sebastian Young. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He wrote a book I think you'd really like called Tribe. he was an anthropologist by trade, and he embedded with some guys in the military, and then made a documentary called Restrepo. I think he won an Oscar for it, mid 2000s. Yeah, and he's like a war correspondent, is what I thought of him as. But he wrote this book, Tribe. He mostly studied North American Indian tribes and stuff. And he was kind of taking it, he's like, what's weird that we have this PTSD epidemic right now? Because the facts that he was seeing, they didn't add up with the narrative of the way that we view the broken soldier and the combat trauma. Apparently, people who were in the heaviest combat with the most fatality, they tended to have lower incidents of suicide and PTSD than the people who didn't. And that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But apparently, really what he comes down to, I hate to paraphrase so much of what he's saying, but it's bad, it's traumatic to visit war, to be a part of it, to witness horrible things happening to children and like innocent people. It'll always be a sore spot for me to visit sometimes. But we heal pretty well from trauma. Human beings can do an incredible amount of healing from an incredible amount of trauma. I saw that with the Iraqis, especially, like watching luckily it kind of dawned on me as I was feeling sorry for myself, my first tour or two in Iraq, like, oh my God, we're eating food out of a can and working 20 hours and it sucks, everything sucks. Well, at least I go home if I'm alive at the end of this. Like these kids here, like this is their home. This is their reality. They would probably trade an arm to be in my shoes rather than their own, you know? So I don't know, like I started thinking that a lot about the Iraqis, and specifically, I think that one of these days we're going to have to do something to apologize to them for this fucking travesties of wars. But I totally got off, like, now I'm getting drawn off to thinking about this one little girl. What were we talking about specifically? If you could get me back on track.
You know, I'm not even sure what the last question was, but I'm right here with you for the ride. So like it's been really interesting. So over the course of how long altogether were you in the service?
Just shy of 15 years.
We kind of lost, I think, the chronological order a little bit.
I know, sorry.
No, it's not your fault. It's been really great. But to try to get back on board and set the timeline straight a little bit. So you had your training, and then you had your initial
You can call it assignment, I guess.
Yeah. And then you said after 2 years they got you to come back again, right?
Right. So
re-enlisted.
Yeah. I mean, I was still in. I just extended, I guess. I extended my contract. Right.
And then at what point did you get different promotions along the way, different titles? Like, when did you become a Green Beret? If you can kind of paint out the timeline a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, let me try to do a big one-over that might make things make more sense, I suppose, the kind of timeline. So I came in 2003. I started at E3, private first class. I was promoted to E3 automatically because I had some college classes and whatever. They just sort of started me there. But you're still at the very bottom of the totem pole. I mean, where you are. And then it takes about a year and a half to get to E4, which is still not a non-commissioned officer. You're just a senior nobody. Like, you know kind of what's going on. And that's kind of, you're the guy who knows how to get out of shit. It's kind of where you're supposed to be. E5 is where you become a sergeant and you get your stripes and you're finally a non-commissioned officer. I got my stripes in my second tour, so I was in for maybe 3 or 4 years. I had done a year I'd gone to Korea. We were there maybe a few months. A year in Iraq, and then back in Colorado for a year, during which time I had my re-enlistment and all that stuff. Back to Iraq for 15 months, and so that put me at a little bit around over 5 years, because that would have been 2008, right? 2007. I should probably write this down because it actually will be tricky. I have to use certain milestones or to kind of guide my memories of where we're at. Pretty sure 2008 is when I went to selection. Yeah. Yes. Okay, it was. So pretty much at the January 1st, 2008, I got back from my 15 months in Iraq. I was in E5. I was a sergeant. So during that tour, I had kind of stepped up a lot. Like, I went from, the first tour, the 12 months, I don't know what's going on. I'm just trying to get through this shit. And then before I headed out to the second tour, I think I was already in E4 and I was starting to take some leadership of certain things, including our indirect fire thing. So I went to a school to talk to aircraft and stuff with some Air Force folks. It was a new program. And when I came back, I was serious about it. By this point, I started to realize I was going to have to do this professionally. And I created a program. Basically, I ended up teaching all the officers in the battalion, like how we were going to call for fire and creating, you know, little cards for them to carry in their helmets and stuff. So I think as I started taking more charge, they allowed me to get in charge of more things, which was great for me. So by the time I finished, I was simply just trying to get through that tour and out. But about halfway through the 15 months where we'd lost several people, and me and the guys that were doing the holding together of everything, there's like 5 people in each platoon of 30 that were basically just holding everyone together as best they could, because it was, you know, a lot of people didn't want to be there, a bunch of fear and horror, you know, that's kind of what you did. So the guys that were in charge got to do a lot and got to feel it out. And I think at a certain point, I think we got word on the radio that an Italian journalist had been kidnapped and that they may have a location in our sector where we were. And so me and my buddy looked at me like, holy shit, get your gear, man. We got to get ready and we got to go kick a door right now, maybe. And comes over there, like, no, wait, like SF's going to come in, like special forces will handle that. You guys just like stay back and like keep traffic out or something. And I was like, man, wait, I'm sick of being on the sidelines of doing this shit. Like I was about to get out shortly and I had very much a war experience. But I realized that I'd always wanted to slide down ropes off a helicopter, do like the cool shit that I saw in movies, right? I realized I was about to finish my military career and never have done any of those things. And it kind of hit me like a ton of bricks that, well, I can't leave this goal, like, I can't leave this as a fantasy. And it was nice to have a goal that was just so lofty, because I never would have considered that I could. In fact, me and my friends would joke about it, like, hey man, you go be a Green Beret someday, huh? Like, never meant seriously. Like, nobody did it for real. And I never really believed that I could do it, but it was nice to train up for it and to have something that you just put your head down and have a goal that you will never stop until you reach. Like, that's your thing. And so I went to selection as soon as I got back, because I realized like that was the time to make the break. All the dudes that I loved the most were either dead or getting out right then. And if I stuck around more than a minute, I was going to build new bonds and I would never be able to leave again. So I went to selection. I call it selection. It stands for, it's SFAS. It stands for Special Forces Assessment and Selection. Colloquially, we just call it selection. And it's between 2 and 3 weeks. Are you familiar with like Hell Week? Have you heard like Hell Week before as a...
Heard it in the context of like sports and stuff.
That's funny the way that culture travels, man.
Yeah.
Well, it's the Navy SEALs famously have Hell Week as part of their like tryout, their selection process.
More intense than my basketball team Hell Week was.
I don't know. I wasn't at your basketball team, but I would have. I don't know. I met maybe. It was well, it's basically, you know, it's Hell Week. It really wasn't Hell Week the whole time. I mean, initially it was really weird. There was a bunch of things that I really thought were fascinating. You get into weird groups where you run into the woods and they have these weird boards of like, hey, there's 3 boards here. You can't touch the ground, but you have to get this one barrel over there. And then they just start timing you. And you'd have like, yeah, there's really weird puzzles, individual psychological testing and stuff. I don't like heights. Never liked heights. And they have a couple of things you have to climb your ass over. It's called the confidence climb, where that's where a lot of people realize they don't want to do the shit that badly anymore. And then, you know, it's kind of not too bad. You're wandering around in the woods. You don't sleep very much or eat, and you constantly have to run. You're never allowed to walk. So anytime you move, you have to run. It's crazy doing that 24/7. And they don't, unlike the Navy where you get these guys in your face screaming at you, you're gonna quit. They do the opposite and it works like great. They don't talk to you. They don't interact with you. They don't give you any feedback, which turns out most people need. They need to know how they're doing. And when you don't give it that, it drives people fucking insane, man. Like, people who need to have somebody in authority tell them that they're doing good or bad. They need that. That's most people, actually. And that's something they specifically withhold. And it'll take guys that were very smart, fit, all these great things who couldn't do that. And it's good to call that, because you operate in a very uncertain environment once you get into special operations, like you often are. So like, for example, and I can't talk completely about it because it's kind of secretive what they do in general, but there was this one, they don't do it anymore, but one day you're running through the sand pits. They have these sand pits that just go on for miles through the woods in North Carolina. And you never know. They don't tell you how long you're going to go on a run for it. Like, hey, today you're doing a 9-mile run, you know. They just say, start running. You just go. They're like, you do have like little timing things you get in like races. But they just, they send you off to run, and we'll tell you when to stop. And they had a big group of dudes quitting. There was it was like a really nasty run, a bunch of hills. And after several miles, I was slow. I was toward the end, always on run. I got to where it looked like the finish line, all these cones and stuff. And at the cones, there was another cadre who's like, all right, candidate, like when you make it to me, it's like, here's this other hill. You got to go up that and then around and continue. And right past that, there was a bunch of people just pulling off. Like, what? I thought I was done. Like, I can't. Like, they would just sit to the side, call the truck. They're done. They quit. And funny enough, like the hill that they were at, it essentially was only like 20 feet to the actual finish line. But nobody made it there because they thought they'd made it. Their head was just barely making it there. And as soon as they were told they needed to do more, they quit. It's like, dude, you literally could have walked 20 feet and you'd be in, you know. And it's funny how effective that kind of stuff was. The suffering then became very great for the last week, where it was just carrying 100-pound stuff uphill both ways, like just torture. Like, for example, I suppose the trek they don't do anymore, but the trek they keep it secret, but it's around 27 miles of walking. After you've already done everything, they just like have you start walking, and they time you with your rucksack and everything. And it's almost a 30-mile walk at night after you've just walked 10 miles a day at least for the whole time. Like everyone's, like my feet had stress fractures, but they were just mostly blister. My foot was mostly blister. And that's like one of the main mechanisms. You've taken some long hikes and stuff before, huh? Yeah. So you know that, and it doesn't sound, it wouldn't, as a city boy maybe, it never sounds like, oh man, you get blisters on your feet. That hurts. But it's like, no, like you were out there just walking on blisters for a few days, weeks, like, yeah, you'll quit. Like it's bad enough. It's actually a really effective, let's see how bad these guys want to be there sort of thing. And like, I was never going to quit, even though I didn't think I was doing super great. And I was kind of dejected because I messed up one thing. And you're just always in your head a little bit about, damn, I don't think I did very well there. Plus you have these, like you break up into groups and then have to rate each other. It's like, hey, there's 8 people in your little team squad or whatever. They'll make you, all right, put everyone in this squad in order from 1 to 8, like right now. And no bullshitting like, oh, these guys are all cool. Nope, 1 to 8. And then fire 2 people. You have to fire 2 people. Write out why you're going to fire them. And then you have like 2 people you can give like a blue. They call it pink and blue. Like pink slips for firing and blue is like, I want to recognize this person as great. And they like tabulate all that stuff into a score as well. So your peer reviews are actually really a big part of whether you get selected or not too. Which there's psychology behind that makes sense to me. It's like, hey, we're watching you. You know, we're sitting here with our clipboards, but we don't know what you do when we're not around. But your friends do. So if you're the kind of asshole that as soon as we're gone, you just don't help out and you're just, you know, you're in it for you and you don't give a shit about your team and you're kind of an asshole, we need to suss that kind of stuff out before you move forward. So that stuff's effective, but it just keeps you in a state of constant uncertainty, right? And at the end, like my succor, what I held onto was like, they can tell me that I'm not good enough. Like that's coming up at the end of the 2 weeks. They finally tell you you don't have to run anymore. Once you come across from the trek, they're like, all right, put your feet up and relax. We're just going to do paperwork the last day and then we'll tell you who made it. And then you just straight sleep for like 12, 20 hours, however many. And with what was left, I think I started with a class of 350 and there was 70 of us left at the end. And then I think they selected about half of us, if I recall. And I didn't expect to be selected. I mean, there was that last day, they're like, hey, we're going to call out some names and these are the guys that are kind of on the fence where you'll get a board opportunity. You come into a board of senior guys who will question you about your performance, and you'll have to sit there, sorry, Major, blah, 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 explain yourself. I left the road thinking that it was going to, whatever the fuck, right? Try to still talk your way in, as it were. And I was like, that might be my chance, man. Maybe I could convince these guys. And my name didn't come up into the board, and I was like, fuck, that means I'm either straight go or straight no. It's like, man, I'm fucked. But I was like, that's cool, man. I told myself that this could happen. I'm going to come back next month, and I'll come back the month after that. And they cannot they can't stop you from going, really. Most people don't go again because it's horrible. Like I looked so bad after 2 weeks that a homeless person bought me a beer at the airport on the way home. Yeah. I was just like scabs and skinny and like limping, but I was pretty fucking happy. I don't think I've ever been happier, honestly, than when like they fuck with your head too. And there's a show that you could watch on National Geographic. So I'm not really spoiling anything that isn't out there for people that are, looking for it. But you're in a number the whole time. I was 230. You don't get a name or anything. But at the very end, they have you in a room. They're like, all right, it's time. It's who's decided to be here or not. And they start calling out numbers. Like, hey, we call your number. You go see that guy at the end of the room and go out that way. So you don't know if it's good or bad. They just start calling numbers. People start walking out of the room. And you're like, should I want to be called? Like, what's happening? Fuck, you don't know. At the end, they close the door. They're like, all right, that's the last number. And there's just a handful of you left in the room that you're just like, fuck, man, here they are to give us our concession speech or whatever. And some guy comes out who ran the program. He's like, we really want to thank all you guys for coming out here. You showed a lot of heart, and we're really proud of your effort and like the fact that you cared enough to try and all this stuff. And we want to let you know that you can come back. Like, we're all this. And he basically is just bullshitting, like telling us that we failed. And so he's like, no, what I mean is you can come back because like you're selected and we're fucking, we're like, you're all good. Cry for a second, a little emotional explosion. And at the very end of that night, the guys that have made it, we went to Texas Roadhouse that night in Fayetteville at Fort Bragg. And through the parking lot of cars, I could tell who were the dudes that we had because you didn't know any of these guys. They came from all over the Army, right? And you just see like these hobbling heads in the parking lot heading in. We're like, those dudes with the hobbling feet, like, yeah, he was one of us. You just all found each other in the bar, got lit off our asses because I lost 25 pounds in 2 weeks. Like, just, you're all just emaciated and you get drunk instantly, like one beer. God, I was so pumped.
Difference between like the Green Berets and like what you were doing before?
So initially I was in an infantry unit, just conventional Army is what it would be called. When you go to Special Forces, it's a different mission. Green Berets, it kind of like the CIA and the Green Berets were both identical. They were the same organization and they split in like 1950, where the OSS and the precursors were like, hey, we want to have a civilian version of, our national security arm, and then we want to have a military special operations. So actually, I guess technically U.S. Army Special Forces were the first SF. And I think the Navy, like UDT teams became SEALs in the 60s or something. But we got given our Green Beret by John F. Kennedy himself, which is why currently, if you go to the training area that I was, where the Q course is, it's still called the JFK Center, and they got a bunch of JFK stuff. Because the beret, the Green Beret, not allowed. Not authorized headgear in the military at all. But Green Berets, Special Forces guys were wearing them in the field because they would go train with the commandos from the British Army. The British Army commandos have had a Green Beret for like ever. That's their thing. So we basically stole it from them. They're like, hey, anyone who's been to British Commando School gets to wear one in the field.
U.S.
Yeah.
The U.S.
Dude, that's how it's like the office was certainly better on our side. And the berets, we do wear the beret better. I don't know if it's a better unit, but it's, we stole it from them and it was totally like, you could never officially wear it anywhere. Like you'd be in trouble. But when JFK came to Fort Bragg for like this little demonstration they were going to put on, all the dudes there were like, fuck it, you all put it on. And they wore it and they told them that, hey, this is our beret, this is our history of having it. And JFK was like, that's awesome. You guys get to do that for sure. Like, boom, presidential decree. So like he made it official that day. And so since then, Green Berets have actually been something you could wear. But even back then, nobody wanted to go into to Special Forces because it wasn't famous. No one had ever heard of it. And it was 100% the end of your career. You would never make a career in the Army. Because the way that you were looked at, oh, so you're a unit, you think you're somehow better and you're going to try to take my best people. Fuck that. So the regular Army basically had a really bad, dim view of them and cut them out of everything. So as an officer, if you went to SF, that was where your career ended. You were never going to go, which is great for SF because it meant that you had a bunch of cowboys, surfer dudes, hippies essentially, that were now kind of left to their own devices because they were given missions that were so big and nearly unaccomplishable that when they came through with results, no one was really in a position to complain about their methods. And I think that's why the culture became so relaxed and something that I could vibe with, whereas the regular military culture I could not vibe with. Yeah, very different culture. SF it's all about like who's got a good idea right now, who cares where you are in the there's a business term for that called flattening the authority gradient. Like instead of having sir and all, we didn't salute people in SF ever really. It's not that we don't respect your superiors. It's just that if I don't feel as comfortable bringing up an idea if we have a rigid authoritarian, but if we're all kind of on an even keel, even if you're a 5-star general and I'm whatever, hey, I might have an idea that's really important that could change things. You want me to feel comfortable speaking up if I feel that I do have such an idea. So their culture is very loose, lax. Some people hate it. Some military folks look at that, they're like, that's not disciplined. All right. Like the Marines, culture is antithetical. And that's what's sad. The guys that are in Marine Special Operations, they're fairly new. They've stood up, and the whole core is very much, it sucks. Going to the gym with those guys, they would get stopped every other set in the gym by some Marine who walk by and, hey, Marine, come here. Like, your haircut's out of regulation. Just start screaming at them, and they just have to stand there waiting for an opportunity. Sergeant, my unit has different regulations for hair or some shit, but they never, because to a Marine, the idea of special is already like a sin to think about. What Marines do is they give you a Marine. That's why they even use that third person, like impersonal ass way of describing it. It's a Marine. A Marine can do whatever a Marine is trained to do. They make them into Legos. I mean, the great thing about that is you make a product that's standardized where I know what I'm getting. You give me a Marine, I know that he can do this, this, and this, for sure. But the negative side of stamping them so strong in such tight boxes is that really doesn't allow any creative thought, or their culture doesn't allow for special circumstances. There is a right way, there is a wrong way, black and white, and that is it. There is never any gray. And that's kind of scary. But I mean, that's the culture, and you need that like hammer of policy somewhere to, if you ever need a large military action. It's kind of cool to see it as a way of shaping people, but it's also kind of frightening to see how much it's really effective at shaping people. But now Army SF is nice and chill, and I like that. And I think Rambo is the only reason it got famous, to be honest. I don't know where the whole fascination we've had in the last 20 years with special ops came from. But I don't know. Yeah, it wasn't a big deal. It wasn't a cool thing. And then somehow in the 70s and 80s, it became cool. So really the difference being, too, because so much is put on you, you get training and opportunities and influence that you would never, ever have. Like, have you ever seen Red Dawn? Oh, man. So there's a classic, and they remade it unnecessarily, of course, and it was not quite as good. I think they filmed it all here in Washington, where the Russians invade and they take over parts of the U.S., but some kids and like Boy Scouts start a little insurgency group, so they start doing little harassment raids, like just hit and run, and don't give the guys anything to shoot at, because the Russian army is obviously a lot stronger than these kids with BB guns, but they realize, hey, attack, disappear, like we don't have to stand and fight these guys. We couldn't, but they start harassing them and they start making life really difficult for those Russians. And that is unconventional warfare, guerrilla warfare. And that is the absolute bread and butter of the Green Berets, is saying, hey, we could take 12 guys instead of putting an American presence in this one nation. 12 guys, all of them, and you have all these specialties. So a 12-man team is essentially pretty much self-sustaining. I'm a medic. That was my specialty. You got a dude that does weapons, building stuff, explosives, commo. Really, you guys are an entire army kind of smashed into 12 people. So that's why the training is so long and ridiculous. And then you get very little guidance because you're dropped behind lines where people aren't admitting that you're there. So you have to be mature enough to understand what your job is and not have to get clearance every time you want to do something. You kind of have to operate on your own. And so that just all these things make it a very different culture and necessitate like a really cool amount of training. But theoretically, by using that model, you can link up with, let's say there's elements that are unhappy with this government. Cool, we'll find them, get them out in the woods, train them up secretly, start employing them, and get them, and start basically you want, rather than an American face, you don't want America to be seen as a puppet here. You want to make sure their face is on the victory. This is a popular uprising of this nation, and you put them forefront, you stay very quietly in the shadows, and you build them up something where they can hopefully take over, this despot, whatever. They make up a country that you're doing this in for your training and stuff called Pine Land. And it's kind of weird sneaking around North Carolina with like in the backs of trucks and stuff for real. They have the cops looking for you. It's pretty interesting. Wow.
So when did you start to, I guess, decide that you wanted to leave? Because it seems like once you're in it, you're immersed in it, it becomes a way of life. So like, when did you get to the point when you're like, I think I'm gonna step away from this, and how did you actually start to approach doing it?
It's a journey, dude. And I mean, as I said, I certainly was anti-military, anti-me being in the military for almost half of my initial career. And then when I got to SF, it was a goal that I almost didn't believe would happen. When it did, before long, I mean, even after 2 years of training, the Q courses, they call it the qualification course. You get to go there if you get selected. And it's where I got trained in Korean. I got trained in medicine. That was like a year. And then basically all the other tasks, your fast roping, building rafts and stuff, survival, tactics and guns and all that other nonsense, blowing stuff up. And then you do like a little training mission with your group. So it's like, for me, it's over a 2-year process. Even though I went straight through and timing worked out, it was just a lot of training. Still, I came here to 1st Special Forces Group in Washington for my first assignment on a team. And for about 2 years, you just have no idea what the fuck's going on. It's just so much to learn that you just shut the fuck up and try to be helpful. People are using acronyms you've never heard, and you've been in the military for years. You're like, what the fuck? And it's funny too, because the difference, all right, in the regular military, you're very much handheld, and you get very few. Like, for example, the idea of like spray painting my weapon to be camouflage. Are you kidding me? Someone would come over and immediately like snack. You're like, what the fuck? You're going to clean this off right now. Everything has to be the same. Everyone's gear is literally going to be worn the same. And it's just, I didn't like that. And SF, and you have I had a regular basic ass guns too. You don't get to choose what gun you want. You get the gun they give you, and it's kind of a standard ass weapon. And if you get really good in a unit, people like you might get one of the few like optics that you get or something. But then when I got to my first team, day one, you get to this cipher door with the code. You put in your code and open it, and it's called your team room, which would be a good deal bigger than this. But you got 12 guys, so you have 12 big lockers with the assignment stuff, and then you have a briefing materials and all the stuff for your office. This is where you work. And I came in and met the team, and they were like, hey, let me show you your locker. You got to sign for all your gear. Okay, cool. I go, and this guy opens up this Pelican case on this table, and as he opens it up, there's like all these guns with big suppressor cans everywhere, night vision thing, all the shit that I'd literally never even seen before, except on movies. Then suddenly he's like, here you go, just sign for all your other suppressor there, like all my shit. And I'm like, outwardly, very much like, okay, so I'll sign here and here. And inwardly, I'm like, I want to do a backflip. This is the coolest moment of my life. What the fuck is all this shit? Like, it's just funny that you have to be playing it cool, but it is super cool movie-like stuff, almost like right away. It's just the problem is that you have very little to contribute initially. I mean, the learning process is intense. I mean, ask any doctor, for example, right? Like, if you take a doctor and they stop practicing medicine for a few years, they would tell you to go to another doctor. Like, it's highly perishable. You got to constantly be learning, and it's just like that with SF. It was exciting for that reason. I grew a lot, but it was a scary first couple of years of just like hoping that I didn't fuck anything up for anyone else. And yeah, once I finally got to be good at things and I became like a senior dude on the team, I think that's when I started to realize like, shit, I'm not maybe looking for the door instantly like I always have been. I was getting nervous as I was getting better at it. I was like, man, the better I get at doing this, the less I feel capable of doing anything else. Like, the less I have in common with people living in life day to day out here, right? And I knew that, and I didn't want to be defined by military service. I literally had always wanted to just get in and out, like, and yet here I was seeing myself change into someone who was a soldier through and through. And I kind of had an itch to get out, but it wasn't until I got blown up again, my final explosion in 2014 in Afghanistan, that the concussion was so bad from it that like I was off for like a week or two. I was like weird, a little dumb. Like I was worried it might be permanent almost, and it did slowly improve, but my faculties never, I don't know, they're still a little fucked up. And from what we learned about CTE, the repeated exposure to blast trauma and to those concussions is leading people to dementia and like dying early of your brain dissolving and shit, which is like a horror movie. And also my brain is like the most valuable thing of me. So I couldn't get it injured anymore. After the last bomb went off in 14, I was like, man, I'm done. Like, you got to cash my chip in. Like, I should have probably not even been around that long, but it was tough. It was a tough decision by that point because, God, I think that's all I knew. That's all I was that guy. I was Sergeant First Class Tuttell, and I didn't know who the fuck I was if I wasn't that. And I hadn't had any time to think about it, but I did make the right call, and I knew I did. I had to step away. It was insane that had been in long enough and had kept getting fucked up, but surviving. But I don't know. I wanted to still have a brain when this thing was all over, so I left. But it fucks with me. It does. I miss it. I mean, what are the things I'm describing to you? They don't even scratch the surface of how important it feels on a daily basis to be challenged in such a field and to constantly have, I mean, you don't get to feel super cool in SF. I don't know, maybe some people do, but if you're honest with yourself, I mean, you go to work every day, you look around you and you're just like, I hope no one notices that I don't belong here, right? Like everyone's a fucking superhero. It's crazy. I don't know how and plus everyone you know is a Green Beret and a SEAL. And it's like not cool anymore. It's like literally all you do. So it's why you get into a weird space. And I had a really awkward time talking about my military service for years because in SF, I didn't talk about my military service. I didn't lie. I didn't bother coming up with cover stories. I've just found that luckily most people are not terribly interested. So, hey, what do you do? I'm in the military. Oh, well, what do you mean military? You're like, I'm the Army. Like it's called making them peel the onion. I just layer a few things so that they get very little information and generally they're waiting to talk about themselves regardless. So I never had to work too hard on that until I'd find someone who'd be like, wait, what's your MOS code? I was in the Army, like I know. And at that point, I'm like, I'm not going to waste time jerking you off. Like I was an 18 Delta. If they know what that means, then it's already kind of done. If they don't, then I'll tell them. It's like not a secret, but you're supposed to be a quiet professional. You're not supposed to run your mouth about what you're doing. And so that's why it's hard now to do it. You've just like, there's a voice in the back of my head like, shut the fuck up, show up. Like, who the fuck are you? Like, it's just not what we do. It just feels very unnatural to talk about it. But I mean, I can and I should talk about it. It was like my whole life, but I would definitely spend the rest of my life meekly, never saying anything if I followed my feelings. Like that is kind of how you become conditioned and stuff. That was another reason I did what I did at the party, is that I've never felt comfortable sharing this stuff. I don't feel comfortable with like the idea of showing off trophies or medals or stuff like that. But then I realized, hey man, this is just, it is what it is. And it's a big piece of my life and these things all mean something to me. And I was really glad that you liked it. It was something I thought of. I wanted the party to be something that sort of, hey, if I die tomorrow, here's like kind of what I've done so far. Like this is where my journey has gone. And I'm glad that you got that out of it because that's pretty much exactly what I was shooting for.
Thought it was super interesting. So now that you are out of the military and you are taking time to process and look back on it all, how do you end up feeling? I get a lot of like when I'm hearing you talk about it, I get a lot of like mixed feelings from like I get a lot of like I guess maybe trauma, from things you've gone through, but I also get like roots of pride in terms of like, it seems like you're very good at what you were doing.
Thank you.
Like the relationships you built and even just the day-to-day like sense of meaning. It seems like there's a lot that you like feel accomplished with, but I also see like that you are also struggling in some ways with just the whole reality of it all. So when you look back at it now, do you feel like is there anything like, I guess, what do you feel like you accomplished in that time? Do you feel like it changed you on a personal level? Like, how do you kind of feel like it?
Okay.
A step away.
Well, I mean, there's definitely some big things to say on that one, too. It changed me drastically, and I think that wouldn't surprise anyone. But the ways that it surprised me the way that it went down, I guess. I told you about when I was shot in Iraq in 2007, and that a week after that story, I was still at work because we had no people. Like, it's like, okay, you good to go? Like a couple days, I took a couple days off and then went back on to patrol, just limping around. And a week later, I was in the Humvee and I was the front passenger seat. My buddy Joe, like one of my first friends in Korea, so by then we'd been friends almost 5 years. Best friends, like hung out every day. we were driving over an intersection. It blew up underneath us, and he was killed instantly. And I thought I was dead. I was stunned to the point where I couldn't move, and I was floating weightless, staring at like a cracked windscreen of a Humvee. And I was just thinking, whoa, shit. Well, my eyeballs wouldn't even move. Like, it's like, well, this is my brain shutting down. Like, this is the last seconds of life, apparently, was the thought. And luckily, when we landed, it sort of knocked me out of that stun. What was left of the Humvee sort of collapsed and crushed. It was just, it was a big thing. It was a big crater, and it was a bad day in that regard. And I don't know exactly why I started talking about this. It's always I go back to this a lot. I mean, it was a bad day. I mean, I wasn't a medic then. I was still a forward observer. And so now I would tell you that, hey, there's certain reflexes that are indicating death pretty well. And the lack of the corneal reflex is one of the last ones. So if you can touch somebody's eyeball without them having a response, then that's and that's kind of instinctually, we almost know that, but I couldn't find anyone. As I got pulled out of the Humvee, I was trying to find everybody. I couldn't find Joe. I went around to the far side, and I seen he'd been blown back. He was laying flat, but his eyes were open, but like dust had settled, like a thin layer on his eyeballs as he was like staring up. And it just instantly sends you into panic and, mode. I started trying to dig. What was left of the Humvee was kind of on its side against like sand in a crater, so you couldn't open the door. So we're trying to dig out and open this up, and then I realized, wait, we're probably about to get shot. Suddenly me and all my friends are here trying to dig frantically, but really, we need to put people up the corners and start looking out for the ambush that's likely to continue. And as soon as I did grab a couple of people, got in position, an ambush did. Someone shot at us with a machine gun from about 100 meters away on a balcony. So we engaged them and got rid of them, luckily pretty quickly, and nobody was injured. And for that is what they apparently gave me a Bronze Star. I don't know what they gave it to me for exactly, but like doing my job, essentially. I was very uncomfortable with that medal for a long time. The Bronze Star with Valor is rather prestigious of a combat award, but all I could see and think about was Joe's death, like being awarded something for him dying. It was so I never really talked about it for years, and I've kind of come to terms with, like, I didn't put myself in for this medal. Like, someone else does that, and it just happens. And it's, us military folk know not to put too much stock in medals, right? Like, who knows what it all means. It's more like the civilians that don't know how to judge somebody's service from the outside. Like, how would you, right? That seems to be a metric that's as reasonable as any other metric. So it's been difficult to come to terms with my flair, because I did a good job, and I guess I am proud of being a reliable combat soldier. It's something that I do hold in high regard. Everyone in that profession does hold those, those traits in high regard, right? So that's true, but it's just weird. I've never been comfortable feeling proud about anything. But I have found too, and it's funny that you noticed, and I'm glad you did, I have had a lot of trouble with defining the purpose of my life. I had purpose essentially given to me. Not only that, not just purpose given to me, but I had a social network given to me. I had friends that would die for me, that I had to see every day. I didn't have to do the work of establishing how you nurture relationships, even the basic amount of work you do in a normal life, right? Like, I think that's a big reason why I just don't have the ability to like text people back. And PTSD, you also keep people at a distance unconsciously. You don't mean to, but you lose people that you care about, and it causes you a great deal of stress and pain. And I think you seek to minimize that. But I just feel like it was a tough time getting out of the military. The book that I referenced earlier, Tribe, by Sebastian Junger, he talks about basically saying, hey, the PTSD epidemic has probably very little to do with the actual horrors that people are experiencing in war, because there's two types of PTSD, chronic and acute. Acute makes total sense. Oh shit, a saber-toothed tiger jumped out at me. If we're back 10,000 years ago, you would want to constantly see a saber-tooth every time you saw it moving in the dark. For a little while, you'd want to be more careful. You would want to have nightmares that made you see it again, and to really reinforce how important it is to survive that next time. And that should go away in a couple of months. And that's generally how people respond to trauma. A couple of months of poor sleep, hypervigilance, whatever. And then they sort of resume normal eventually. Chronic PTSD, it just sort of never, it seems to go through that fight or flight, and fear never really gets turned off. It just stays on. And the problem would be that, okay, well, maybe you haven't resolved whatever the fear was initially. And if basically he's saying that we all grew up for 99.999% of human beings' evolutionary history in small tribes where we had people you didn't even care about. Man, I don't even like this guy, but I would die for him and he would die for me because the group defense is that agreement of group defense is kind of how we survive as a group. And there's just, you always had a place you belonged and were needed, and you fit in. I mean, there was a place you fit in. You were a part of a tribe. That's how you lived. That's how we developed all of our social cues and reading facial micro expressions and shit for 100, 200,000 years. It's something that now in the last 200 years has drastically changed our entire way of living. And you got a lot of kids, a lot of young men, especially. I'm using young men as the example, but really this is agendered. This is just using the traditional standard gendered roles, where young men, being more genetically expendable, were generally the warriors of a lot of societies and stuff. Well, now you got some 18-year-old, let's say he came from a broken home and never really had parents that showed him love or anything, and never had a good social circle and never fit in anywhere. Well, you join the military and suddenly you've got a family of 30 people in your platoon who will die for you. You have a place to show up because you have a role to play. You are a part of something. And that feels good. And even if you're getting shot at, it feels better than being alone and just not having any sort of social support. So a lot of these guys, they don't even see anything horrible. Maybe they hear some stuff in the distance, right? But most people are not exposed to drastic amounts of combat in these current wars, or the most recent ones. But the PTSD rate is skyrocketed. And Sebastian Junger's idea, and I think he's onto it, is that most PTSD, people are damn near concocting or fabricating memories to explain their PTSD to themselves. When the reality is that, man, for a little part of time in your life, you finally were nurtured in a tribal group. And now you got dumped back into society all alone, individualized, where we don't need each other. One of the great quotes from that book, he said that the problem with our modern society is that it does not provide us enough opportunities to sacrifice for each other. And that's an important, sacrificing for each other is a social glue that, we used to always have in spades. And it's really, I think that honestly explains a lot more of the PTSD problems we have. I think he's onto it. I think most of my PTSD problems are the fact that I lost my tribe and I don't have one. And that my life was it. God, when I thought I was going to be dead by 30, man, I lived like a motherfucker. It was so great. I mean, it sucks. Now I got to figure out what to do. When you're sure you're going to die, tomorrow does not matter. It was so great to be in that headspace. And now that I got to figure out what to do with the rest of my life, that actually becomes very scary. It's somehow scarier to think about surviving. I totally made peace with being dead. Now I'm scared because now you're faced with actual fear of mediocrity and all the other things that really come from actually living a life. I wonder how cowardly I'm going to be now to find out.
That's really interesting, I think. Certainly not, I think, what most people think about or suspect, when they hear these kinds of stories. And it's like, wow, this guy is so brave to be able to do this. And then to hear you talk like vulnerably about what it's like coming back, I think is going to be really eye-opening for a lot of people.
Well, I've been a hero and a coward, and I think most people have at some point, right? And I think it's important to know there's times where even after I was a strong and tough guy, that I didn't live up to my values in certain situations that I've revisited in my head and been like, man, I know better than that. So I don't know, I hope that people understand that, if you've never experienced bravery in your life, it doesn't mean you're incapable of it. And bravery doesn't always look like running into a burning building. I mean, there's certainly bravery that's even more important, I think, than that people are displaying when they go on strike for a union where they've got safety issues and stuff, and they're potentially risking their livelihood or standing up against a community that's doing something wrong. And there's a lot of real courage out there from people that would never do this kind of shit that I did. So I think I just like to make that distinction when people are hearing. And I think, now that we're talking, one thing that I would love for the world to hear more of is special forces is very sexy and cool. But the guys that I were in the regular lame-ass army with, like the no special, no nothing, went through some of the most heinous shit in the world with me. And they deserve to feel proud for their service. And I fear that everyone's a Green Beret or a SEAL in TV and movies nowadays. It's just everything is always taken up to that next levels because of our society. And I just hope that people understand that doesn't mean I'm any better and those guys are not any worse. and they deserve to be. I guess what I'm saying is, how about when you hear someone's in the military, don't ask like, hey, were you a Green Beret or a SEAL? In the sense that I just don't want people to feel inadequate about what something they maybe should feel proud of, perhaps, right? And I fear that's the case because of the way we really I don't know what you call that phenomenon, right? Where everything has to be at its maximum elite level or else it's nothing. Like, that's kind of weird.
I'm curious what your experience has been like in terms of like veteran assistance. Like, that's something I hear a lot of people talking about. It's like, how do we treat our veterans after they come back? I'm curious what your perspective on that is. Have you felt like you've had resources made available? Like you talked about, didn't you toe in with therapy earlier? Was that something that like the federal government had set up for you? Or is that something you sought on your own? And similarly, I know that you have advocated for like the use of psychedelics, and I'm curious if that's something that you ever had like official channels be like, hey, here's a tool we have, or if that's something you went and sought out on your own.
Wow. Well, I'm gonna see if I can. I'm really glad I didn't. I do smoke a lot of weed these days. I'm running from a lot of demons. I'm glad I didn't today, because I'm gonna try to stick with all of that. And I think.
Sorry,
I think initially.
Dumped like 5 questions on you.
Well, I appreciate you listening and being thoughtful. I mean, this is what I would hope. I mean, we have to assume there are people listening that can't be here with us who might be thinking a lot of these questions, and I definitely appreciate you guiding me along to that stuff. So I think actually to address this part of what I want to say, I'd like to go back to something you asked that I didn't answer very well. I found that I was a very anxious person. I didn't realize it. You don't know. If the background screen of your entire life has been this, you never know that it's different. The background of constant anxiety and it was just all I knew. But it manifested as I was a very shy child. I very rarely spoke to people outside of my group. I was very shy, bashful. And I guess just thinking I was mostly in my head. I existed in my head, overthinking things, replaying scenarios through. A lot of people do this. And it just, I guess, really, I was super worried about what people thought of me, even though I was a nonconformist who didn't give a shit what people thought of me. I clearly did, apparently, care a lot, and I didn't even notice it until when I lost Joe that day that I described in 2007. When I looked at him, I mean, there was so much going on at the very time that it happened. But a couple hours later, I got to the hospital and got patched up a little bit, and went and saw his body at the morgue. They had prepped it and went to say goodbye. And it was weird. He didn't look the same. And that's another one of the things that strikes you. He looked good. He had just gotten a haircut and stuff. But it's like he was gone. It was almost like, I think there is a reason we need to see the body. I do. I think that it's some level of closure. It's like you look at him, it's like, yeah, that's not him anymore. There really isn't. And I think people do see that. I'm sorry, I'm just right now thinking to myself, like, that must be why we have that custom. But at that moment, when I looked at him, I suddenly, it's like hit me at once. What years and years of building up of like, I just wanted to laugh at how silly it was. Like, all the effort that I constantly was expending, worrying about how cool was I, or what was I doing, all this shit that I didn't even realize I was constantly in a state of stress and anxiety. It's just like, wait, what was I worried about this morning? Like, what was the big problem in my life this morning? I was losing my mind about something. It was like coffee or some stupid shit. And like, now I'm looking at my dead friend. I'm like, I was worried about that. Like, it just suddenly put things in. I think you've done some psychedelics before, yeah? I would say perspective is one of the major reasons that psychedelics are effective for people. It just often gives you perspective. It shows you that perspective of a bigger picture where you are minimized in it, and rather you get to see yourself as just a small part of a larger thing. And it just, in like almost instantly or overnight, I went from very shy, the guy that I'd been my whole life, to suddenly a dude who was, I guess as I am now, very outgoing. People think that I'm an introvert that did nothing but read. And it was like, oh, you're so outgoing. I'm like, well, I've learned to be. And I'm still an introvert. Like, after that party, I had to sit at home for like 3 days and not see anybody. But
Piece together. At what point in your journey did you do so?
So in high school, a couple of times, one of my buddies was, who does this? At 12, he was like, I'm going to be a horticulturist. All right, man. But he was growing psilocybin mushrooms, and he was very knowledgeable on this. So at high school, a couple of times we'd eaten some shrooms with him. So I'd had some psychedelic experiences, but I didn't have really any trauma to see them in the context of medicine. It was just, hey, let's watch some Pink Floyd and have some shroom tea. Good times, but absolutely recreational. And so definitely very different than when I have them now. I think the first time I took shrooms, it was, well, medicinally, was after the events that I'm describing now, which would be, this is Iraq in 2007. We got there at the end of 2006. Basically got home like January 1st of 2008. So really that time frame. Once I got back home, I hit some shrooms up after a couple of months because, I mean, my wife at the time, my ex-wife was, she was noticing, she's like, hey man, you are on edge and all the PTSD issues. And I knew that she didn't deserve to deal with that. And I just thought, I don't know why I had the idea that shrooms were the way to go. I'd read up on it and knew something about the way that it apparently would impair your amygdala's fear response. And I did feel that way. It's like when I took shrooms, I was able to relive those experiences. I could go back, but instead of being the protagonist, I was more of a detached observer, sort of seeing myself. And it's just basically being able to have some kindness for myself. Being able to say, hey, look at that dude. Like, he's doing the best he can. Did he do this perfectly? No. But I mean, before that, it's just all you think about is the ways that you could have done something different. The ways that you could have worked harder before the mission to maybe, make things turn out differently. And being able to revisit the really painful memories with this emotional armor, essentially, it felt like I was able not only to have kindness, but I could feel the pain or that searing emotional response, but it was blunted and it was a little bit just removed so that I could actually apply some rationality, some sense, where I could have the kind of kindness with myself that I would have with everybody else in the world, right? And that, I think that almost overnight, like it really did, the effects of PTSD that were being experienced, at least by my ex-wife, were pretty quickly handled by it. I mean, it really brought me back to earth really quickly, and I feel like it kept me on a tack of remaining introspective about these memories and these experiences from a direction that's a lot more productive than back when it was simply like trying to view those memories was like looking at the sun without sunglasses. It was just too much, but it was there and it was significant and not needed to be dealt with. I feel like I looked at mushrooms, the psilocybin mushrooms specifically, as a tool that allowed me to actually start doing the work that I needed to do. And so and then I had a lot of other friends that were in the same spot from my unit that my apartment kind of became a place where it's like, hey man, go to John's apartment. Like I shaman people through a lot of trips where they released a lot of shit that they didn't even know they were carrying. And I have a couple of people, their wives will call me, they're like, they are still grateful for that moment. Like that one experience was transformational enough that years later, it's still seen as like a watershed moment. So that, to me, that speaks very much to the efficacy of shrooms for what we hope to use them for trauma, especially. Yeah.
So I get the impression that you sought them out on your own, and then you weren't hooked up with some special veterans shroom program.
No, those are starting up now, and that's pretty good. Luckily it's happening so much. It's almost like podcasts. Like as soon as I look to go do something, enough people are doing it already. And I'm like, well, but I think it's a big deal. I think that a lot of veterans need that perspective. A lot of combat veterans specifically. I think the non-combat vets, it's just like how we talk about how we need more mental health care services in the streets out there. But I feel like, yeah, we do, but there's only so much you can do until we fix the underlying problem. And you can't, the fact is that people's lives are fucked up. And I saw that when I worked in hospitals during this medical training. It's like, I was going into medicine was my plan. I looked at medical school and I really was excited to be a doctor. And then I got to do the job basically. and got to see the side of people that are really sad, like out here, the desperation, the diseases of despair. You have to realize, like, I can't cure them. Like, I can't. They come in, and I just have to look them in the eye and be like, yeah, I can't fix your life. I could do something about this one issue you're having today, but I think I'm going to see you tomorrow. I would like not to. Here's the things you can do or that you need to do. But if you can't, I don't know, it really kind of broke my spirit to see that we're really working so hard on finding ways to deal with this problem 3 steps after it, where it needs to be dealt with. I think until we bring equity into we shouldn't have desperation being a motivating factor in people's lives in the most wealthy nation in the history of the earth. I think it's insane. And I think every fucking day we should be running around like our hair's on fire. Right now, as we sit here, the neighbor that I had in Tacoma, on Christmas Eve, she got evicted out of her house with her kids. And I saw her as I was putting in my key to my place, and we just locked eyes for a second. And she kind of looked away quickly and left, and I saw what was happening. I didn't know, but it's like, how fucking heartless, number one. I don't know who did it, but at the same time, it's like, Jesus, our kids in the van. They're learning at a very young age that they're never safe, even on Christmas Eve. That shit breaks my heart when I think about it. And it's not like that's happening to a lot of people, a lot more than we think. So the idea that we're just going to somehow crack down on drugs, put more people in prison, and we're going to fix that, like this, all the drug use, all the homelessness and the crime and the shit, it's a symptom of the real problem, which is late stage capitalism. I mean, capitalism is fine, but where we're at, it's pretty amazing that we've got everyone in this position of increasing desperation. You could tell them, hey, how about maybe we tax the billionaires a little bit of the money they could never spend and fix everything? Nope. Like, wow, I thought that would have sold. Like, nope, can't do it. No, because I'm next in line to be a billionaire. Man, I can't let you limit it. It's wild, man. I know you didn't ask that, and I'm sorry to go Bernie Sanders on you, but everything's kind of related to politics, sadly.
It all ties in together. And to go back to the other part of my question, I'm curious in terms of veterans support systems.
What's your experience been like?
Okay. Well,
Have you felt like the
Country's taking care of you since you've gotten back?
I've thought about doing. I don't do this because I don't want to be a dick, but I have considered the answer. I think so a lot of people would say thank you for your service. It's kind of a thing people say. It's been conditioned into our culture, and I believe we do it for reasons that involve mostly the fact that there's some internalized guilt that we don't even know about consciously. Because I think somehow people know that there's a war. Should I know about it? Should I have asked questions of my politicians or something? It's like, hey, just say thank you for your service. You are absolved. That's it. It just washes away all civic responsibility to actually, stay informed and grill politicians on what the fuck. That's yet again another reason I like the idea of mandatory federal service, like a draft. If everyone's children suddenly had the risk of going to war, do you think they would have happened? No, dude. Congress would have been marauded by parents demanding answers. Why are we going to Iraq? What are we going to get out of it? Instead, we didn't. People are too broke, dejected, and just looking forward to the next check to really look around and see what's going on. And 1% or less of the U.S. population actively serves. So that's not a very strong lobbying group. So if you can just make us out, by calling us heroes, that makes us expendable. And we're doing what we're supposed to do. And you're doing what you're supposed to do when you say thank you for your service. Anyway, the point is when people say that, I want to say, oh, thank you for saying that. So you're going to vote to raise your taxes a little bit to fund the VA? No? Well, then what do you mean by thanking you for your service? How it's just some shit you didn't mean that you say perfunctory, greeting that you literally don't think about. Well, I would love to almost take those opportunities to challenge someone and be like, here you are talking about supporting the troops. Okay, are you though? Is it okay if your taxes went up a little bit and we put all these vets into homes or something? Oh, no? Well, then why do you go around thanking us? It's fine. You don't have to. You don't owe me anything. But when I hear people making statements that they don't think through, I do want to make people think about these things and challenge them. It's like, what does it mean to you? What are you willing to give up if you're so pro-troops? Because right now, apparently the answer is nothing. We don't fund the VA very well. It is staffed with a bunch of people who are not getting paid what they're worth, who are working their ass off and doing a great job, but they're doing a great job against the system that's constantly cutting But just so it's kind of a losing thing that's demoralizing the hell out of some of the most giving and nurturing people in our society. They're being burned out by this lack of funding, lack of care. And it's too, even if the VA magically suddenly had every resource in the world at its fingertips, well, you still can't change the fact that veterans are getting out and they have no sense of purpose. And there's no place they fit into our society. And I mean, there's just no clean answers, right? I'd say that the VA has a lot of great people doing a lot of great work. There are actually some benefits that are available to me ostensibly. And yet I have real problem. Part of my mental illness is involved just never being able to take help. I can occasionally, but like when I go through anything bureaucratic specifically, the second I hit a roadblock, done. I just deuces. So I just assume I'm going to handle it by myself. When in reality, I'd be a lot smarter and I'd be much better served probably engaging. But last time I went to ask about therapy, it's like, yeah, in like 3 months, we can get you with this one person like once a month. I'm like, man, that is too far away. That's not enough. Yeah, I just walked away and did nothing instead, which is probably not better. I don't know. I tell myself all the time about how I'm going to go to therapy. I've been telling myself that for years. I'm getting really good at it.
So maybe there's something left to be desired in terms of making resources accessible.
There's something to be done there, but I don't want to disparage them since it's mostly on me, in my case at least, for sure. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, to lighten things up a little bit, why don't you talk a little bit about the role that comedy has played more recently? It seems like that's like kind of a tool that you've had to kind of, I guess, find more community again and like talk through some of your experiences, find the humor in it. So why don't you talk a little bit about the role that comedy has played for you?
Thank you. Yeah. You know, and I'd be curious to hear about your journey toward the comedy. For me, I wonder, when did you start?
I started less than a year ago.
Less than a year? Okay, yeah.
Last year.
So you're real fresh on the scene.
Yeah.
Well, I think there came a time where getting out of the military, I looked into, fortunately, I was hot on the, the cryptocurrency scene early, like really early, to where I was able to somewhat get money set aside that I put myself out of the need of desperation or whatever. But plus with the military giving me a retirement, for the first time in my life, I don't have to think about money on little stupid shit. So I realized, given that position, like that is an incredibly privileged position that nobody has. Like I can just survive with having a pulse, apparently. Like that has never been a case in my life. So I really felt the need to, take advantage of it. And that really comes to, I'm a bohemian by nature. Like art is really where music, performing in general. I knew that was the space that I got the most pleasure in and enjoyment. And then I also just realized too, like having done the things that I did in Spec Ops, especially the amount of crazy James Bond lifestyle that's super sweet and badass. And it's just like, no one would believe this shit. It was incredible. I can't even talk about it. Fuck. But like super fun, definitely not your cubicle 9 to 5. And then to go to a cubicle 9 to 5, it suddenly seemed like I just knew I wouldn't be able to take it for a second. Like the idea of just the same thing every day, drudgery, this magical, silly existence that makes no sense, and we're going to piss away all of our hours doing manual labor that is, I don't know. To me, it just suddenly seemed like such a huge crime. And I think that comedy was the one place where I could say like, hey, here's where I can make my own rules. May not make any money doing it, but at least I'll be working for myself, working in an art form that I really do. I mean, I've loved stand-up since I was a kid. Comedy Central, I feel like came out, it was even pre-Comedy Central. They had a couple of channels where you could see some stand-up late at night. Even as a kid, who I wonder how the hell I definitely missed like 20% of all the jokes minimum. I'd have to. But I found I was able to watch several hours a day of stand-up, and like even watching like Richard Pryor and George Carlin back when I was like before I was 10. So it just was always one of my favorite things. I think I like the idea of being able to present the way that comedy is presented. There's a good field. There's a variety, right? You have maybe your George Carlin's more situational, just talk about the philosophy of funny. And then you've got Hedberg, which like, hey, Mitch is just going to tell you very clean, tight stoic jokes that are, semantically extremely tight, and it's almost like a puzzle you're solving, right? And like that's what's so cool about comedy. It just happened to be a space where I knew that there was no buy-in. Like nobody could tell me that I wasn't able to do it. Like I could go up there and do whatever I want. And since, like, as I guess we're getting at here, my life has been atypical according to other people, and that brings a challenge, right? Because on the one hand, I want to share that with people. I know that, hey, most of you haven't had this experience. You might wonder what it would be like if you were in this position. And I'm going to do my best to tell you. You probably would have felt like this. I like to be able to do that. It's difficult to do it on stage and be funny. So I've learned I've never really bombed super bad, but, storytelling this conversation on stage would not work. Right? So, but I had to learn that. It's been a slow, this is also why I haven't done much self-promotion, is because I'm learning so much still that you're like, dude, at some point I suppose you have to take the plunge, but right now I haven't plateaued is what I guess I'm saying. I don't feel a huge amount of confidence that I've found my voice, that I've locked it down. I think that I'm close. I think I've developed toward that, but I still feel like right now people talk about, hey, are you looking to host the headline and do all these things that you would want to do for your career? And in my head, I'm like, I just want to be funnier. I would hate to be famous now. Like, I should be way better in like 6 months. I don't know.
I get that. You want to feel prepared for the moment.
Right. Because opportunity, should it arrive, being prepared for it is definitely what I'd like. And I'll tell you right now, if I got a call, hey, you got to be on Letterman tonight, or I suppose Letterman's not even, but something to that nature, right? I would make it happen. I think one of the great things too that we didn't touch on, but just, I didn't have much in the way of self-confidence now. And I worry I might become off as arrogant and even be arrogant sometimes. I try not to be. I do believe that I'm 100% fallible. I know for a fact. But I mean, being able to trust yourself in the right moments is kind of cool. And it takes like life getting its volume turned down. Experiencing extreme things that make everything else seem relatively small by comparison. It was like that Buddha cow, like any emergency that happens in life today here in the States, most people are freaking out and I'm chill. Because I'm like, all right, I've been here before. I know, like, this isn't even that big of a deal comparatively. Like, who's dead right now? Nobody. All right, next thing. Like, it's an amazing thing to be able to have. And I'm glad that I got that resilience of knowing that I can trust myself. If I were to be called up to do late night TV right now and I'm not prepared properly, I know that I'd be able to shake myself and be like, nope, you're not ready for this, but let's fucking start writing and prep. And I would go up there and present it without fear of failure. I'd be nervous, but I would also make it happen. Like, I don't think I ever would have said that when I was 25. I don't think it would have ever come out of my mouth. I wouldn't have believed it at all. I had a moment actually, dude. I don't know if I don't want to get too much into medicine, but a cricothyroidotomy it's where you cut a hole in here to stick some airway. We had a guy with his face blown off practically, and I got to the tent in Afghanistan, and I put a tourniquet around his leg because his leg was gone from the knee down. He'd been hit by a mortar shell, and his face was like, really, it looked like he had a baseball on his cheek just because his facial artery had been severed inside here, and it was leading into this space, and it was just basically like a water balloon. Luckily, it's called tamponade. The pressure in there now was so tight that it couldn't bleed anymore. But I couldn't get through to him. A lot of these guys in Afghan and the Hindu Kush mountain area of the Pashtun area, they do poppy all the time. Opium is kind of a big deal. They grow it all over the place. So there's a lot of people that have pain meds don't do shit to them. Morphine doesn't touch them. To them, it's Tuesday, right? So this guy, every time I came into my tent, I didn't have much to work with. He was taking his tourniquet off of his leg because it probably wasn't comfortable. But I mean, I need him to not be bleeding out of his femoral artery. So I couldn't hold him down too. As soon as I had to go grab something, he would start taking it off. And I couldn't get through to him that, dude, you're going to die if you do this. Like, stop doing it. So I had to put him down. Ended up, as soon as he went down, his throat collapsed, and there was only one other medic in the room. He was like, oh shit, like, this guy can't breathe now. And so I got the scalpel out and I did the shit that I was supposed to do. I trained always on animal models before. Humans bleed a little bit more. And the first cut, instantly my guy next to me was like, oh shit, dude, are you fucking this up? come on, man, be a little bit of a better buddy than that. Like, and it, because in my head, that was exactly the panic that just instantly grabbed my head as soon as he started bleeding, and it did not look the exact same as all the training. It's a quick moment of, oh shit. But, as opposed to when I was 25 or whatever earlier, luckily, yeah, I was able to just literally catch myself mid-thought and be like, stop, you've been trained to do this, do it right fucking now, just do it. Like, turn it off, all the fucking screaming, just fucking do what you've been trained to do without second guessing yourself and all that other stuff. And it worked out, and it saved the guy big time. But fucking just doing that, like, I don't think that like, that's what I mean, I guess, about having been put through crisis so many times. It's nice to know that, like, I've found a way to, like, catch myself when things are overwhelming and still be able to say, hey, I've been through much crazier shit than this. I'm feeling overwhelmed, but, like, take a second, stop everything, and realize, like, there's something to do right now and it needs to be done, and I can do it. Just, I don't know what I'm getting at exactly. It's, I guess, just one of the good benefits of kind of the weird emergency-based life. Yeah.
So, to get a little cheesy at the end here, as somebody who has seen war firsthand, lived through it, do you still feel optimistic about the state of the world? Do you feel like world peace will ever be achievable? And yeah, how do you feel about those kinds of big questions that I like to romanticize?
All right. Well, I think I get you, and I will give you a story in return, or a little bit of one, I suppose, that kind of captures my feelings on the subject. I went to survival training. There's a certain point, and it's really, a lot of it's classified, so it makes talking about it fucking annoying. But during your early part of Green Beret training, you go through, it's called SEER. It's an acronym that stands for Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape. They teach you how to be sneaky and get out. So if you were to happen to be imprisoned by the enemy, get captured, then it's how to deal with that, how to maybe get away if you can, or if not, during interrogation, how to make sure that you survive interrogation and yet still don't spill all the beans or whatever. And how, more importantly, how you band together with your fellow prisoners in this suckfest and maintain. One of my favorite things that I heard there that I've never heard elsewhere, it's like, so the guards will do shit to you. They'll, like, grab one of you and, like, put a big heavy coat on them because it's like 20 degrees and you're all in, like, hospital gowns, like, freezing the whole time. They'll give one guy a coat and give him some food and, like, arm around him and just walk around for a while just to piss everyone else off, and then, like, release him back and get people squabbling. They'll do that all the time. And, like, one of the things you're training, this is not classified, I can say it, is called insulate, don't isolate. So when you do have a member of your group that's starting to, like, sell you out, or you did something to disloyal, and you guys all want to shun this person now, it's a natural human reaction, that is the wrong answer, exactly the wrong answer. You need to, instead of isolating them, insulate them, bring them into the center, find out why they felt that they were not a part of it, and literally, like, physically bring them into a cuddle fire. It's super weird, but, like, that's something that we need to do in our society so much. And I've never even heard that advice anywhere except in training for how to survive being a POW. And that's fascinating. And secondly about it too is that time, and this was a week-long exercise where you're sort of on the run. Then you do get captured. They find a way to engineer a capture so that you can spend time in prison being tortured and interrogated and stuff. And you're there for, I lost 25 pounds or so, almost 30 pounds in a week, which is crazy. You just eat nothing and you're freezing and shivering the whole time while you're being tortured. So you're just burning calories and starving. And during interrogation, every now and then they'll call one at a time into offices to interrogate you and then beat you, do whatever they're doing. They'll often have some food to offer you. Like, hey, have a burger. Why don't you chill and relax? And, the idea is like, no, man, you're not going to feed those guys. Like, I need solidarity, whatever. Or even better, oh no, I can't say that shit, classified stuff. But at some point, somebody was getting their ass beaten. There was apparently a saltine cracker that survived the ordeal. They were able to get a saltine cracker into their hospital gown and maintain that while getting out of the interrogation. And they would do guard change every 3 times a day. So for 3 5-minute periods in your day, because you were up 24 hours, they would never stop fucking with you. They would all stick you into a room about this size, just concrete, nothing. and you'd all sit on the cold floor, but for once you were alone. There was no guards beating you. They'd lock the door, spend their 5 minutes doing their changeover. So for 5 minutes, you all finally were huddled together, and it's the best time in the world, right? And you're just almost got warmth. And this one guy pulls out this one saltine cracker, right? This guy. And there's like 40 of us, shit, maybe 35. And he takes just the tiniest bite and he passes it to the left. And it comes around and like, we each take a little bite. And that shit got all the way around the room, like with half, because nobody was willing to take more than, I don't know, they wanted to make sure everyone else had some. And knowing that people were starving, like we were starving, like literally. And human beings are capable of really good things, I guess is what I'm saying. Because I've seen the ugly side. And I know that what we're horrible of, but just a little bit of kindness, just one person out of a group can stand up and say, guys, this is not who we are. We're not doing this. Because the mob mentality can get ugly and we can do horrible things as human beings. We've seen this. But the good news is that mob mentality, there's a lot of people doing something wrong, but it really doesn't take much. Just a couple of people to be an example of bravery of some type to get people to come to their senses. So that is, I guess, in opposition to the cynicism that I do have a little bit of, is the knowledge that there is hope, that human beings are better than it seems like they are sometimes. And that fortunately the ratio of good to apathetic, like it doesn't take that many heroes to turn around a whole group of people to realize that, hey, we're better than this, or this is wrong, or anything like that. So having witnessed it in an extreme situation, it seems more real, more personal. So I'd say that, yeah, I have hope. And it comes in the form of believing that human beings can wake up from stupidity when they're finally forced to. I don't know if we're going to do it in time. I do have a lot of concerns about, because, man, we are stupid sheep who are easily led into doing dumb things, and we're currently doing many. But I do think that 50-50. I hope for the best. And I figure what we can need to do is just try to be the example of goodness that we need to see in the world. And listen to each other a bit more.
That's a really great answer.
Happy to share.
John, thank you so much for coming and opening up and talking to me about all this stuff. I know this was a lot of stuff we covered, and it wasn't all easy.
A lot.
I really appreciate you taking the time to be so open and hear my questions. And is there anything else you want to add before we close this thing out?
No, man, I really appreciate it. I wasn't sure what we'd do as far as just rapport and jerking around. I think, as you see, it's kind of, there's so much in 15 years that it's kind of a jumble and difficult. I think this has given me the idea that I'll need to see about streamlining sort of, hey, put your life in a short period of time, or like at least make sure that I do hit the beats. And I'm really glad I shared that thing about Sear and the cracker, because I have to reference that sometimes in my mind when my hope is low. I have to remember the things that I've seen that give me hope. So maybe just making sure that I hit those beats. I think that it's weird for me to hear myself talk so much. Thank you for making this an interview where that felt like that was okay. It's still difficult, but you did a great job as an interviewer, and I very much appreciate it.
Hey, thank you to everyone who stayed to the end of this conversation. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks so much to John for having this conversation with me. And if you want to see more conversations like this in the future, subscribe and follow along. Thank you. That's all for now.